Hello, welcome all. My name is Steve Ward. I'm with Whole Child Consulting. I want to thank CARD FAU for inviting me to do this six-part series, helping you get started with pre-K and elementary students, especially those with autism-related disorders. Our first webinar is appropriately titled "Getting Started." What do we do? How do we get started teaching our kids? Before I get into the content of that, I want to point out this webinar is hosted by Florida Atlantic University Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, which is PEPSA, the Partnership for Effective Programs for Students with Autism. The mission of CARD, I'm going to get my video out of the way. CARD's mission is the FAU Center for Autism and Related Disabilities provides expert counseling, training, and support at no charge for all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities, their families, employers, the professionals and community, and governmental agencies serving them. You're impressed that I memorized that, I suppose. Okay, vision. CARD's vision. FAU CARD provides support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential of all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities. CARD serves 5 counties: Indian River, St. Lucie, Martin, Okeechobee, and Palm Beach. And they have 3 offices in Boca Raton, Jupiter, and Port St. Lucie. They have 1 dynamic service. Services are offered at no charge, and those include family and school consultations, trainings and workshops, public education, referrals and resources, adults, hangout groups, and much more. Okay, jumping back into today's training. I want to start with this question: what is the point of instruction? And it seems obvious at some level, right? We're supposed to teach them things. That's good. Yes, we are supposed to teach them things. If they don't know how to write their name, we want to teach them to write their name, as an example. That one's a little bit early for the pre-K kids, but it's one skill that eventually we want our kids to be able to do. That's an easy way to understand a point of instruction. It's helpful to back up to different perspectives, to come into like the very close in this moment. What's our perspective? What's our objective? What's the point of instruction? And then overall, looking towards the end of the school year, towards the end of their school career, looking at that, what is the point of instruction? And nothing should ever be taken entirely out of the long-term picture. With that long-term picture in mind, some of the points of instruction, these all relate to quality of life, right? That's a great phrase that we should always have in mind: quality of life. We want our kids to have friends, to enjoy playing with others, to have the chance for employment. To this picture over on the right is a gentleman that I have worked with, and that is him overcoming fear of dentists. So he had very successful dentist visit and is showing appropriate pride. For as much as possible, we want our students ending up being able to live as independently as possible, ideally with complete independence. This is our goal. Not every student is going to be there, but we do want to keep in mind where we're going long-term. I'm assuming if you're watching this webinar that you have some training in assessments and curricula. And some of these would include things like the ABLE-SAR, the VB-MAP, PEAK. There's plenty of curricula available depending upon what you're trying to teach and who you're working with. With that in mind, you probably already have plans to teach your kids things like communication of wants and needs, matching to sample the identical object wagon with an identical wagon, things like that, to imitate actions, starting at the very basic ones like clapping hands and touching head, and then hopefully evolving. You're probably already planning to teach them to echo, to identify items receptively or as a listener, right? Touch your nose or find the wagon. And now the student's not matching it. He's looking in an array to find the wagon and either touch it or give it to you. We're looking at some functional things with students, such as sitting on a toilet to get ready for toilet training. This can start in pre-K, of course. Washing their hands, everyone needs to do that. So these are just some of the basic things. I don't mean this part to be to throw you off, that I'm going to be teaching you how to do echoing and matching and all of this. I'm making the point that these are things that you regularly teach, and that's not going to change. And this is obviously nothing but a small sample of some of the things that you already plan to teach. So those are short-term goals, and those are terrific. Sometimes our goals have to come all the way down to the level of what prompt level is he going to need to sign eat this time. When he wants a grilled cheese sandwich, what prompt level will I need to get him to sign eat? That's how close, how short our sight needs to be to dial in on that, as long as we're not losing sight of the long term. And this is a Google image for tunnel vision that gets to the point that sometimes our focus on the short term is excessive. And as we're looking at, I want my kid to match, we might miss some other qualities of their responding that affect the long term. So we can't have our strategies in the short term negatively impact the long-term goals of improving their quality of life. In the short term, one of the things we want our students doing while they're learning how to match the sample or touch their head or whatever we're working on, one of the things we want to, an outcome we want from that is for them to become more and more ready to learn, easier and easier to teach as we go, more and more responsive to us. So I would like you to consider some additional outcomes beyond sitting on a toilet washing your hands, which are all lovely goals. Does your instruction make your learner more appreciative of others? That's great. That happens, right? This happens. We're the ones with the praise and the tickles and the iPad and the bubbles and the gummy bears and whatever else. Does it make our students more inclined to communicate? This is something our kids come to us usually with deficits in communication. So it's great if we can, have that be one of the outcomes, even if we're working on matching wagon and wagon. The more comfortable they are with this instruction, the more they appreciate that the instruction's coming from us, the better the chance it leads to communication. Will it lead them to be interested in a wider variety of things? Will it make them more and more cooperative going forward? We understand that starting with a newly minted 3-year-old or maybe younger, depending on your arrangement, whether you're in the home or not, that they're not immediately automatically cooperative. We're doing some things to help capture teachable moments and get them started and trying to show them the value of going along with us. Is that effective, right? That's the question. If that goes well, then they would increasingly see your approaches, the things that you say, the things you show them, the things you're pointing at. They will increasingly see those things as relevant. Oh, he said, come over here. Yes, I've come over there in the past when he said that, and that's worked out pretty well. That's a good idea. It's never terrible. He never tortured me when I got over there, and something tends to work out, and it doesn't take me forever. So those are some of the things that aren't on your data sheet of matching wagon to wagon, right? These things aren't down there, but they might be outcomes of that instruction, whether you know it or not. Some kids have gone through fairly rigid kinds of instruction, like really easily scripted, somewhat cookbook kinds of instruction, and they've come out beautifully. They've come out really appreciating praise and wanting to show you things and proud of their accomplishments and trying harder when the first attempt doesn't work. They come out just stunning. And some don't, right? Some don't. Some cases, our instruction does the opposite of accomplishing these things. In some cases, it makes them less appreciative of us. It makes them quieter sometimes. It might limit the range of things they're interested in. I will allude a little bit later on to one of the popular strategies that tends to limit student interest. And it might make them less cooperative. They might learn how to escape and avoid instruction or participation with us. Beginning the student-teacher relationship, we want to start by demonstrating that we're the source of good things. So imagine your kid comes into the room and starts looking around, and he sees the pretend play things, the fire trucks and all of that stuff, and he sees a window to look out of, and he goes and he explores these things, and you attempt to join, And whenever you attempt to join or greet or give any kind of instruction, your student sort of turns away and moves away, right? That's an example of a kid not yet seeing us as a source of good things. We are new, we are competition for good things, not a great situation just yet. I'm also describing, hour one of day one of school. So fair enough if that's where we're starting off. Hopefully our students come in appreciating some praise, appreciating high fives, smiles, tickles, squeezes. That's wonderful. Um, a lot of times our learners are going to come in and they're going to rely upon some more basic kinds of things for some of the reinforcement. So hopefully they do like tickles and bubbles sometimes, but it's not going to be enough for us to have them be motivated enough to join in our instruction consistently enough, right? We're not going to get enough instruction out of that. And it's really hard to say, here, if you do this big job, I'll smile at you, right? It's hard to turn that into something that really inspires a lot of work, especially initially. So we might be looking at some more basic kinds of things. We might be looking at gummy bears and time with an iPad and things like that. The first rule of reinforcement, meaning things that we do, that we offer for our kids, we make available after some kind of good responding. The first rule is that it needs to be effective. Okay. So as inclined as we might be to pursue natural reinforcers, as we should, we want to be, yes, I'm so proud of you. That's wonderful. I love it. Try this one. That's pretty natural kinds of reinforcement. If that's not enough, if we've decided, boy, we really don't want to use gummy bears, but that's not enough. Our student in the presence of a puzzle when we're trying to give high fives is not inspired, is not inspired to do the puzzle, then we owe it to them to use something more effective. We might not be having them work for natural reinforcement. They might actually be working for escape then, right? We were hoping it was natural reinforcement or social reinforcement, but it was actually escape. That's worse. That's, as a general rule, that's worse than working because you love the gummies that you get while you're working. Okay, so to begin showing our students that we're the source of good things, good outcomes, we want to assess what their interests are. There's a wide variety of questionnaires that are available, really short ones, really long ones. You can make them up your own, on your own as well, for just getting started, asking people that know a student what kinds of things they like. I'm going to see if I can easily cut to one example of that. And this would be just something that I found on the internet. If you've worked with behavioral companies, they will usually have these in stock as well. I'm not going to take a long time going through this, but just to show you, we're looking at categories of reinforcers. And this is a pretty good one. I like this questionnaire better than a lot of them. Looking at, do they like the hugs or the okay sign? Stim time, that can be a reinforcer. Look at activity reinforcers as things. We're not only looking at gummy bears, right? That's the nice thing. There's a lot of other things we can look at. Do they like it when we draw? Do they prefer markers or crayons? Do they prefer to draw? Do they want it on a whiteboard or on a sidewalk? Is any of that fun at any level, or are they just utterly disinterested in that? This is a good reminder, as any of these questionnaires are, of the need for us to be creative in looking for reinforcers. I am very open-minded about us using edibles as one of the reinforcers for students. And I also don't want us to assume, okay, you're coming to me, you're new, you're diagnosed with autism, so I know you're going to want M&Ms and Cheetos, and I'm going to set those up, and we're going to do stuff with M&Ms and Cheetos. That is not a good assumption. Those might not be, by a long shot, the best reinforcers for our students. We have a little bit on the bottom here, looking at other areas of interests, things that are disliked as well. Ideally, we're getting into topics. Oh, our kid is interested in dinosaurs. I recently met a kid interested in the tectonic plates. That was brand new on me, but he was really, really interested in the tectonic plates and obviously knew much more about them than I do. Try to get us back onto the slideshow here. That is not the slideshow. Here we are from current slide. There we go. In addition to those questionnaires that we might start with, we can just observe kids. Okay, the example kid I said who came into your classroom hour 1 of day 1 and looked and checked out the toy play things and checked out some books and checked out some blocks and things like that. Okay, how long did they stay with any of those things? Did they open the book and turn the pages and look at anything and smile? Apparently they like books, right? We wouldn't have found that out without allowing them the free time to go and look through the books. Another thing we can do, of course, is to probe. We can say, oh, how do you like this little tickle? How do you like my hand on your shoulder? Is that good? You like it? You hate it? It's somewhere in between. Those things that they seem to like, we give them a little bit of space so that they can show us they like it. I might come put my hand on the shoulder, pat it a little bit. Okay, great. I wait a little while, see something else, pat the shoulder again. Now, does my student start to look to me? I could use another shoulder pat, Mr. Steve. Great. Now I know you like that. I didn't just force it on you. I gave you a little sample. I watched to see if you liked it, and I gave you the chance to initiate subsequent shoulder pats. I took a really easy, tame example with that. Nowhere is motivation assessment more pure than in free flow play. Okay. This is a friend of mine, Steve McQueen from London, working with a student on the spectrum here. And he's just being a monster. He's just making noises and charging at the student. Remember, our kids' interests are what we call idiosyncratic, right? It doesn't, every kid doesn't love M&Ms. And some kids will be scared by this charging and roaring that Steve is doing. And our friend here is not scared. He appreciates it.
Steve can give me.
Gotcha!
It's hard not to like that.
Did you say Steve get me? Louder.
Steve can.
Now, of course, our learner here is a little bit more advanced than some of your kids are going to be, in the sense that he has a vocal request in his repertoire, what you might know is called a mand in verbal behavior terms. He's already asking vocally. That makes it pretty easy to understand. Most of the time, our students' words do line up with the things they want, and then some of the times they don't. That's subject to your own analysis of what they mean when they don't mean come get me. We might, at an earlier level with a student, if we were trying something as robust as the roaring and charging, we might just need to watch for a little eye glance, right? If we wait for words or we prompt words, we might crush the interaction. There might not be an interaction because our student might not be able to say all those words, or he might be turned off at the expectation that we say these words. He's like, no, I don't follow your expectations to say words. I might glance at you. Say, okay, good. Then if you will glance at me, at least I know you're interested. So I will take that glance. I will reinforce that glance. And now we're getting started with some communication, with some reinforcer assessment. No language involved. Just you're proving the motivation, and you're learning how to turn me on, how to use me as a cause and effect toy. You can get me to charge when you glance and smile. I coined a term. It's not meant to be a scientific replacement for any other terms, but it works nicely as a metaphor. The steam that the little engine that could required to get up the hill, right? You need a lot of steam to get up the hill. I forget how it turns out. I don't think it ever made it. But anyway, it did make it. It did. I do know how it turned out. I like to use initially a loose assessment of steam. This is not an objective scoring system here. This is a subjective scoring system. What this accomplishes, though, is it directs teacher attention or teacher's aide's attention to what the student's level of interest is. Right? Remember I talked earlier about the tunnel vision? Okay, we have to do matching. My program sheet says do matching now. That couldn't lead you away from attending to what the student's STEAM is, what the student's level of interest is, right? I find that most people, parents, aides, whoever, most of them have pretty good ability to gauge how interested a student is if I just require the exercise of doing it sometimes. It doesn't take a lot of training to do it usually. It just requires me to say, do it. And then they do it and they rate, and I might calibrate with them. I might look at this and say, yes, I saw you roll the car down the ramp. And yeah, the student watched you a couple of times. He didn't grin or chuckle, grab for the car, grab for the ramp, reach towards you. None of that. But he did watch it. So it was some level of interest. So we'll give that a 2. Now that same kid, when you crashed the car into the block tower and the block tower came falling down, then he laughed out loud. He got up, he picked up the car, he looked at the teacher. Yeah, that's some peak stuff there. That's high steam. That's the stuff we're watching for. Notice in the comments here, there wasn't a direction from us, go get the car and bring it to me. If our student needed me to say, go get the car and bring it to me, it's possible he was merely complying. It's possible that he wasn't very interested in it. He was just complying. Not nearly as productive. It doesn't reflect great steam. My last example on this one, I intentionally went to more of a teacher-directed example. So now we're saying, let's do the shape sorter. We're not going to force compliance with this, most likely, but we are seeing, will our student go along with this reasonably well? There's no reason to dislike a shape sorter. I'm going to give some assistance. And yes, we judged that when it was our expectation, it wasn't a spontaneous play behavior, but it was reasonable steam. It was a 3 of steam for going along with our expectations. He accepted some prompts. He looked a little bit. He turned a piece. Good. One of the silver bullets for our intervention throughout the career, the whole academic career of our learners, is trying to find ways to make activities better with us than without us. So in the car play example and the block play example, if our student enjoyed that, that's good. That's better than not enjoying it. But if he preferred to do it by himself instead of have us there, that's a little bit more bad than good. Right? It's good. He has independent leisure. That's fine. That's nice. He'll play. Hopefully he's talking to himself while he's playing. That's good. But if he prefers not to have us there, then I'm concerned that we're on that slope towards defensive behaviors, defending the materials, rigidity of the behaviors. No, this has to be done in this way, and I really dislike it if you try to do it in this way. We're working against social interaction instead of towards social interaction. So if we're able to join and show, no, I have some amazing ideas for car and block play. Check this one out. You haven't thought of this. This is amazing. This helps to condition our attention as a reinforcer. One of the most important things we can do for a learner. It sets the stage for spontaneous imitation. If they're engaged, they might want to try the same play behaviors. Sets the stage for requests for attention. It facilitates transitions also. Let's say that we were going to play with the car and then we were going to do the shape sorter. And on the shape sorter, remember, I'm going to say, hey, it's time, let's go and do the shape sorter. I want you to follow this expectation. I'm the coach now. If my student was playing all by himself and didn't want me with him, and then I said, let's do the shape sorter, that's going to be a much more difficult transition for him than if I was playing with him and he loved the fact that I was playing with him. I said, hey, you know what? Let's go over here and play with this. He was already in my world before the transition instead of being in his own world before the transition. That makes a big difference in the quality of the transition. When we're part of the reinforcement can't be stolen, right? We don't want, and I'm not making a value judgment on theft or anything like that, but it impacts how our students learn if they're looking where we're not, looking for things that they can access, especially if those are things that we were trying to use, that we're trying to offer them. They're waiting for us not to be by them and trying to access them for themselves. The important part is that they're directing their attention away from us and towards something else instead of directing their attention towards us. And the more that our students like engaging with us, the more our speech becomes relevant to them. I'm not going to have very much time in this introductory webinar to elaborate on how to do that, but I do offer a number of other webinars where I elaborate extensively on how to make things better with us than without us. In short, it's what I described with the car play. You didn't know I had this idea. I can do this with this car. Whoa, that is wild. Okay, cool, good idea. I think you're good to play with. And we want to track this. The loose assessment of STEAM is a pretty good place to start for tracking it. Now let's say we've done our assessment. Our student likes these 8 things. One of them is gummy bears. One of them is CarPlay. One of them is iPad, whatever. Does he recognize that we sometimes control access to it, right? We want to see how is he accessing these? And we don't want all 8 of these reinforcers. Every time he accesses them, it's just he goes and finds them, or he waits until we're not there and comes and takes them, or he sees that it's in our hand and he comes and grabs it from our hand, right? I'm not worried about any of those being rude, but I am concerned that all of his reinforcement is coming away from us and none of it is coming with us, okay? So if I had the gummy bears myself, would my student recognize that? Would he be like, oh, I can deal with Mr. Steve and get gummy bears. I'll make it easy. You can just approach me and get a gummy bear on day 1 for sure. So if you really like that and you tolerate that I have it, that's great. I'll hook you up. Come and approach. I'm working on your approaches. That's great. Some kids see that you have the gummy bear and they're actually mad at you about the fact that you have the gummy bear. Like you're not supposed to have the gummy bear. It's supposed to be down here, or mom's supposed to have the gummy bear. And then that's harder. We have to work on that kind of tolerance in order to set the stage for a nice approach and to be able to teach communication and play and other skills. Something I've been evolving is the basic learner package. What we're looking at in this package is what are some of the things that really should be outcomes. We want them to be outcomes of our learners' pre-K experiences, and we want those to stay throughout high school and through the end. Here's some of the things from that package that we've begun to establish or talk about establishing so far today. One is recognition that teachers sometimes control access to reinforcers, which helps to support social approaches. An approach and a reach or a point for a gummy bear, especially when it's a point for the gummy bear, that is communication. It is not language, but it is communication. It sets the stage for us to teach language and to elaborate upon communication. But that is step 1. Come on, see that I have it, approach me, show that you want it, and ideally point or something like that to access it. And all of this sets up attention as a reinforcer as well. That begins emerging when hopefully I'm the one with the tickles or the shoulder pats or the CarPlay. But if not, at least I'm the one with the gummy bear and you recognize it and approach and point. Good, I'm starting to earn some value here. We have plenty more work to do, right? Among the things we still need to work on are accepting prompts, requesting, basic cooperation, and to some degree remaining in an area. It's less critical when you're not running a classroom, right? To have, I'm working with this kid in his home. I'd like him to be where I am and not to be continually fleeting around the house because I want him to have some focus and some attention span and begin to engage a little bit longer. But if I'm running a classroom with 6 to 8 kids and 2 to 3 aides, I really need him to be in the classroom when he's supposed to be in the classroom. And if I'm trying to do circle time or something like that, it'd be much easier if he stayed there easily than if he was very motivated to get up and move around and get out of the area where we're trying to figure out how to keep him there. So just remaining in the area is another part of the basic learner package that we're trying to establish. We look for teachable moments. This is not a term that I coined. I heard it first from Dr. Partington, who I believe was taking it from the Kegels, Bob and Lynn Kern Kegel. This would go back at least to the 80s, then probably earlier than that. And some of the way I talk about teachable moments is for us to fatten the interaction. So our student likes drinks and we've shaped up that he looks to us to get some soda in a cup. That's great. If he's doing that, can we have him get the cup and give us the cup before the drink? Now it's evolved. It's fatter, right? Now we're making the cup a relevant item. We can teach that as a vocabulary target later on. We can teach him to ask for a cup. This is the value of fattening the interaction, where we're not just, here's a gummy bear, here's a gummy bear, here's a gummy bear. Another way of saying fatten is complicate it. I want to look, how can I begin to complicate the delivery of these things so our learners have more accountability, more need to engage and pay attention during different parts, and to establish the relevance of Mr. Steve pointing at something that's relevant because that's the cup I can have some Sprite in. Yeah, I want to see where Mr. Steve's pointing. That's helpful to me. I won't take the time to read all of these, but here's some more examples of things that can be teachable moments. I will add in all caps, lest you miss it, the building routines. not every teachable moment is going to be born of primary reinforcers. I really want the soda, so I'll give you the cup. Some of them are going to be, you've learned that we do need our shoes on to go outside. So those shoes become relevant. You've learned just that your backpack goes over here when you come in. It doesn't really benefit you at all, but this is part of the routine of what we do. Kids get comfortable with routines. They provide really nice teachable moments for, if you want to reach towards me a little bit, I'll shape that into me helping you to put your backpack on the hook. Get you to open the zipper. If I've been doing that for you, I want to see, can I begin to require that of you? We just ask more and more going along as our kids establish more and more history of success. Okay, manding, that's B.F. Skinner's term for requesting. It's a little bit of a mentalistic term, but it's easier to understand. Requesting is usually the most important means of teaching communication. Some of our kids do come in labeling, or as Skinner would have said, tacting, and really sharing those experiences with us, and that's wonderful. And then that's where we're starting our communication. But a student with minimal social interest right now, and maybe with minimal language, who with minimal interests, maybe he, let's say, just likes those gummy bears, I can begin to show him that communication is relevant by teaching him to sign eat or say e, or give me a picture of a gummy or something, so that he's accessing that gummy bear. Oh, I see, language is valuable, good. And the basic process may not be unfamiliar to you, I'll be brief. We establish motivation. Here, have one potato chip. Do you have any interest in more potato chips? There's more. We look for that time that our student is motivated, and we try to prompt a response. Okay, sign eat. Let me get your hand. Let me touch your hand and lift it up. And if you let me do that well, you're comfortable with it, and you're beginning to try yourself to sign eat, you're getting another potato chip. So sweet, this is good. Notice I made the point of a physical prompt to get the eat sign, and my student allowing me to do that well. This is part of the basic learner package again, right? We do want to teach the sign for eat or the vocal eat or whatever communication form we're using. We also need to track the responsiveness to our teaching procedures, right? So really good request training or manned training. Let's say our kid is learning sign language. Really good training also gets him to appreciate physical prompts. Oh, that's good. And then hopefully to appreciate models, right? So we're not always having to touch. But done poorly, our kids resist those prompts, and then they're almost the opposite of teachable. Done well, they learn to appreciate those prompts, and they're exceptionally teachable. Okay, Goldilocks and the three manders. So our kids have started to learn to mand eat and swing and iPad and some things like that. That's nice. Okay, good. We want that progress. Now, some of our students are going to fall in different places on this table, and we're going to do some different things about it. Let me start with the just right. What we're looking to eventually establish is that they mand spontaneously as much as they need to, but they do respond to prompts. They respond to corrections if they say the wrong word for something, or they don't articulate well enough. We try to push for better articulation. Some students really are upset by that, right? And they will give up, or they might protest, or worse than protest, if we attempt to raise the bar. And I think you can add a t, eat, get the t. We want our students to persevere with that, okay? My next one, persevering during errors or confusion. And eventually, almost surely not at the beginning of learning how to request, but eventually we want our students to tolerate delays in getting something, or the word no for things. That is real life. Now, you're typically developing 1-year-old, 16-month-old. They're getting some vocabulary of asking for things, and it's almost all at the one-word level. And that evolves because we're reinforcing that, because we're giving them those things they're asking for. And there's not frequently a lot of delays or a lot of no, right? So we go through that phase where requesting really works out really well. And then eventually the real world starts to become more relevant. And we say, right, it can't be yes every single time for every single request. So let's see if we can build some perseverance and some patience and things in there like that. I won't have time today to read through all of these, but I'm trusting if you're seeing this that you can pause your recording and read some of these. Some of our kids aren't requesting enough. And some of our kids are doing things too much. They're what some people would call a manding machine or a bully mander. They're whining when they're starting to mand. They don't tolerate delays. And each of those is, less than ideal. We want to increase the ones that are too little and decrease those that are too much. Okay, these repertoires make it easier for students to learn mands, right? Recognizing that we control a reinforcer, tolerating a little delay, accepting a prompt. So much easier to teach Timmy to mand if he comes to the table, the metaphorical table, with those repertoires in place already. Also, if we're good in the process of teaching the mand, we can also be establishing these repertoires while teaching the manding, right? So that's good. That's good. It's a question of, are we attentive to it? Do we have good timing in knowing now is the time to prompt? Now is the time to reinforce? Now is the time to wait, right? When do we have a good feel for all of that? This one, I'm mostly going to leave this page up as a reference page for you, or to pause your videos and look this up as well. I want to introduce you with this page to some of the tools that I've created that are not just looking at manding or requesting, but they're looking at learner repertoires overall. And in the inventory of good learner repertoires, there's 139 items that we assess in there, such as approaching others for tangibles or social interactions, accepting prompts, tolerating no, calmly repairing teacher errors, what Greenspan would have called the dumb listener. I don't know what you're talking about. We're acting dumb sometimes. And this on the left column where it says item, that's the item in the inventory of good learner repertoires that scores this target repertoire. Is our student really not doing that at all, or absolutely gets it, or at some points in between those two? And then if we find room for growth, and we think, you know what, this is really relevant, this is pivotal to how my student is learning right now, I really want to work on this. If we decide that, then we can look on the treatment pages in another book, Teaching Good Learner Repertoires, and that book will give us guidance. Here's how we might work on some of the approaches for tangibles or social interactions. There's a few places, and there's 8 or 9 pages at least in there that are most directly related to that. Thank you card. Here's, if you are looking for a certificate for participating in this webinar, this is relevant for you. To obtain said certificate, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided on the email for this training. Please write down this code as it is required to receive the certificate. WAR 112021. The code is WAR 112021. Okay, we've established more parts of our, or at least we've talked about establishing more parts of our basic learner package for our students. Now we're getting into some following instructions. I look at this first through the lens of my goal is following instructions. It's not what the instruction is. Matching wagon to wagon is good. It's nowhere near as important as being generally agreeable about going along with Mr. Steve's expectations, right? So the wagon to wagon is only one example of how you might be agreeable to going along with my expectations. The instruction can be anything. The real goal is we're building a history where a relatively naive learner is starting to see this teacher has some expectations too. And it makes sense. I should be going along. It's pretty painless. They have the right supports. It works out. I'm getting things. It doesn't take forever. And then this is some assessment part. I can just ask the questions today as this is a very brief session that we're having. Which instructions is your student most likely to follow well? Whatever your assessment and your curricula say, it's time for matching, it's time for touching body parts, it's time for these. That's one thing that's relevant. Another thing, if you're trying to figure out how to get your student to go along well, is to pay attention. My student actually loves matching. He'll do that all day, no problem. Touching a body part, nope. That's not for him. He doesn't want me to touch him. He doesn't want to have to, move he doesn't see where his hand is going once it's out of eyesight. That is not his jam. So we want to just recognize which ones are more likely, which ones are less likely. And consider the possibility, especially if your learner is a little bit harder to reach to get started with, consider the possibility of close-ended activities. Things like puzzles or doing pegboards or shape sorters or things like that, Light-Bright if they have good fine motor skills. If you look at close-ended activities, some of the things they afford us is very good predictability. I see how many there are to be done and really nice signs of progress and a perfect sign of completion. Oh, the puzzle is done. So especially if I maybe wasn't loving doing that puzzle, I can see when it's done and I know I've done well, and I probably know I have a gummy bear or something coming after this, or we're going to go play in the swing or something. Learning to remain in an area we discussed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that now. Ideally, our learners will be remaining in an area with us because they're interested in us at some level. They're interested in what we're doing, and they see the things that we're talking about, our expectations of them, as being relevant. Some of this is earned by spending time conditioning those areas. So as a general guideline, before I'm bringing a kid to a table to do matching programs, I'm bringing him to a table to ask for gummy bears, play with the iPad with me, play with some of those little hopping frogs and tops and things like that. Maybe sit on my knee and bounce and do a song, depending upon their age, of course. Learn how to ask for things, all of that. So like this table is a pretty good place to be. When you're doing that, especially when you're in that conditioning stage, let's see if you like the tops and the coin spinning and things like that. We're gauging our learner's STEAM, which is you might also know as assent. He's interested in it, or withdrawal, disinterested in it. If our learner really does not want to be there, especially if we're in that conditioning stage, we're generally best letting them go. Okay, but I would like to dismiss you instead of you leaving on your own. Go ahead, you can go somewhere else. I also wouldn't want you to take an iPad with you. If I was using the iPad to condition the table, then you are free to go, but the iPad is not free to go. Okay. This is very, very introductory exposure to this concept. If you do end up with students where there's very frequent issues of they really don't want to come to be in the area that you want them to be in, then and it happens a lot, and maybe potentially the withdrawal could be vigorous. Then you do need someone to put their eyes on the student, maybe a behavior analyst, to look and say, okay, I see they're doing this for attention or escape, put in this plan and build it up this way. We cannot today plan for every reason that every kid might not want to be in an area. But a very basic thing that's very easy to understand is, say we want to have a circle time and our kids are moderately interested and they're used to sitting there for about 4 minutes. We know it would be much easier to ask them to stay for 2 minutes than it is to ask them to stay for 8, right? That's an easy one. So I can say if my kid almost never made it 8 minutes and we ended up having to do some unhealthy teaching procedures, having to, give a lot of reminders or coax or cajole, remind them about their toys. If we had to do that to keep them there, I would rather have them do a really nice job of staying for 2 minutes and then invite him to leave. If he'd like to leave, you're welcome to go. Someone's going to go with you. Thanks so much for joining us. This is an easy, blunt one. And these are very, very popular. So this might be a new concept to you. Do not use what I call work contracts. You might know these as first this and then that. People see them as a standard way to explain an expectation and the nice thing to do and a way to be reinforcing with kids that don't understand reinforcement yet. That is too frequently not the actual outcome of a first then contract. The two biggest things I'm concerned with first then contracts, one is that it can decrease demanding or requesting. If your student really doesn't want to do what you're asking him to do, and he knows how to ask for cookie and movie and gummy and whatever tickles, he's not going to ask for a cookie if the job isn't worth a cookie to him, right? The job is too much. Now we have our kid asking for things less often, right? Less willingly. The other thing that happens, if you think about that example, is that it tends to limit the range of interests. Remember, we're interested in expanding our kids' range of interests. we think they're too limited to begin with. We want them interested in actions with toys that we're doing and what their peers are doing. Whatever those things are, let's say, oh, ring around the rosy with a peer. That'd be a lovely reinforcer. But if my student really doesn't want to do a sorting activity, and I want him to do it, and I'm using a first then contract, he's not going to put ring around the rosy as the then. He's gonna be like, nope, if it's this, I just need my iPad. That's what I do when I'm doing stuff I hate doing. I get my iPad. And it ends up being problematic for sustaining interest in things like ring around the rosy. It limits the range of interests. There are a lot of other things. I can talk about this topic for a solid 90 minutes if we had the time for it. Summary. We have introduced you to some basic strategies for getting started with your learner. Your learners are going to bring some individual challenges and some individual strengths. And so everything is not going to line up beautifully with the simple formulas from today. But we have begun to establish some of the basic learner package. These are things we want as a basis for being able to teach our kids those other skills like listening skills and movement skills and communication skills. Again, these include things like recognition that their teachers sometimes control access to reinforcers, social approaches, attention as a reinforcer, accepting prompts, cooperation, manding, what you may know as requesting, and remaining in an area. Thank you all for attending. Please contact FAU CARD at 561-297-2055. That's card@fau.edu, www.autism.fau.edu. And thank you again. Be well.